Welcome to the ReGen Brands podcast, the place for brands, retailers, investors, and other food system stakeholders to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. I'm your host, AC. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's get into today's conversation. On this episode of the ReGen Brands podcast, a voice you know and love is back. Kyle returns after his brief 2-episode hiatus, but this time as a guest. We're diving deep into a foundational issue facing regenerative CPG. We still have no unified way of tracking how regenerative products are performing at retail. Kind of a big deal. From disjointed data systems and third-party paywalls to the chaos of unstandardized claims, this episode breaks down why brands, retailers, and certifiers are flying blind when it comes to understanding regen product performance. We explore how syndicated data platforms like SPINS and Nielsen work, why regenerative claims are often not tracked, and what that means for brand strategy, buyer decisions, and movement-wide progress. Kyle also shares why even the best sales data means nothing if you can't translate it into value. Plus, we share our two-pronged solution to ensure that regenerative products can be tracked just like organic, keto, or gluten-free items are today. And we detail the coordination effort it will require between certifiers, retailers, data companies, and brands. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the ReGen Brands podcast. After an extremely long 2-episode hiatus, Kyle is back on the pod. So welcome back, brother.
What's up? You know what? I'm so stoked to be here. It does feel different because I honestly feel like I'm kind of a guest on this episode instead of a co-host, right? So
yes.
I've got my guest hat on, and I'm ready for the hard questions, you know?
Yeah. Hey, well, we're lucky to have you in any capacity, bro. We'll take it. And I will say, just for the audience, this was supposed to be at least a 5-episode hiatus, but because of some other episode scheduling needs, Kyle was nice enough to do it a little earlier than we had originally planned. But in my typical fashion, as soon as we recorded the farewell episode, I asked Kyle to do this episode on this topic. So, you know, it's just how I roll, bro. I'm sorry, I can't live without you. What can I say?
We're here, man. You know, I'm for it. It definitely, I think we've taken longer breaks, just like for the holidays or other times, just naturally. But you know, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. And as funny as all that is, I would say we are here to talk about a rather serious topic that we've talked about multiple times on the pod in various different ways. But I don't think we've done a appropriate deep dive. And I don't think there is a in-process solution to this problem in the industry. I mean, we're working on some stuff very tangentially, however you say that word.
I'm not going to try to do it better. I'm just going to mess that up too.
But, you know, the baseline opening to this episode or statement we're trying to make is we actually have no idea how regen products are selling at retail. And it's a pretty audacious, bold claim to make. So I think it's our job to explain why that is and how all that works. And Kyle and his roles in the CPG industry would be, you know, the right expert to kind of come in and explain how retail sales data is tracked, how it's accessed, what are the current gaps holding back our level of insight into regen product sales growth and kind of tying regen claims to sales results. So that's what we're here to do today. Anything you would add to that?
I don't know if I would say add. I think the statement you just made is like the bold headline, like the clickbait, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I don't disagree with at all. And I think that it's worth acknowledging that there is some level of information out there and we can dive into why that is incomplete and there's still opportunities to improve and build on the systems that already exist, you know?
Yeah.
So it might not be worth diving into like that nuance right now. And maybe it's worth starting at the beginning of like, okay, why is retail data important? And then we can kind of dive into some of that complexity.
Yeah. The proper headline, which we will not use because we want to be as clickbaity as possible, is probably like, we know nothing about regen retail sales data, but in parentheses, like in aggregate or in total? Because we do know bits and pieces, and individual brands have access to that data, and the data providers obviously have access, but we are not looking at this thing in totality and with any coherence for the work that I think we're really trying to do. That's you know, what am I trying to say? In aggregate or in total or as a unified claim architecture. So anyway, you were taking us the right direction, which is why you're here, to make sense of this, especially for those of us who aren't living in it every day. So maybe the right question for you, partner, first is just like, how does CPG retail sales data work today? What should people know? What's the basic 101? And you and I can riff, and I can maybe ask you some follow-up questions from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good start, but I want to go like zoom out even further.
Mm-hmm.
How do people sell natural food is really, I mean, food in general is sort of like the starting point. And if you
Yeah.
think about, and we'll focus primarily on like regenerative brands and natural products, because that's my core competency and probably most of our listenership. But when you're a small brand and you're just trying to cut your teeth in retail, like you're doing attribute focused sales. So you're talking about, hey, you're regenerative. Maybe you use avocado oil. Maybe you've got a hyper clean ingredient list.
You're organic,
You're
you're non-GMO.
correct, and those are the attributes that are getting you your initial points of distribution. The first retailers that are going to pick you up because there's some level of differentiation. Maybe you're the second tortilla chip with avocado oil. Something along those lines, or whatever other claim for whatever other category you're looking at. And then as a brand and products continue to grow in this region and you try to get into more and more bigger chains, maybe not like the independent local store, the Infros and the NCGs, there's regional chains, then you get into some conventional doors, there's national chains. Like the selling story becomes more important for each like one of those rungs in the ladder. And the attributes are still important, don't get me wrong, but these larger retailers want to see, like, quote, the proof in the pudding. Like, can you actually sell? And they measure that in a variety of different ways. Um, and there are these syndicated data houses who have contracts with these retail partners to collect the scan data. It's called, like, every time your product scans through a register, to
Mm-hmm.
aggregate that information to allow category managers the high level information they need to understand what is and isn't performing in those specific doors. And this goes beyond the specific brand performance, but it can also be tailored to specific attributes, like regenerative or organic or keto or paleo or whatever attribute is hot at the moment. And getting those attributes coded in these syndicated platforms provides a level of recognition for the claim and helps to identify the success and or traction or trajectory of that movement. That feels like a really long ramble and monologue, so I'll pause there and see what
Yeah,
else we need to dig into.
I think it was a really good high level. This is somewhat off topic, but a curiosity, and I actually don't know the answer to it. So, are you saying if a retailer has a contract with a certain data provider that I know, for instance, if Anthony Casaro wants to buy that data, or if a brand wants to buy that data, they are purchasing that data to access that data. But let's say I was the owner of Bob's Market and I had a deal with Nielsen, or I had a deal with Spins. Because they're giving them their scan data, do they get that data back for free? Is that how that works? And are they using it for their own analysis, or are they using like their own ERP system? Do you know?
That's a good question. So, like, I know Sprouts, for example, like Sprouts
Yeah.
as a contract with Spins. That's common knowledge. We're not,
Yep.
this is not like we're revealing industry secrets here.
Yep.
But I also know that Sprouts, I'm pretty sure, uses their own in-house data platform, to check their performance stuff. So I don't
Mhm.
think they're in a spin system, but it's possible they are. I'm not 100% sure on that. I know
Mhm.
for smaller retailers who don't have the resources that a Sprouts might have, they could have access to something on their end. But I actually don't know the answer to that question either. I don't know if they're getting paid for their data that they're providing, or they're receiving some level of service in exchange, or a combination of the two. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
One
Yeah,
thing,
that'd be
one thing I will
interesting to
say
know.
though, when a brand is growing, brands often want to be able to measure their success.
Mhm.
So oftentimes brands will have a higher trade rate or prioritize an account that reports into a syndicated platform. So if for example, Barron's Market in Southern California doesn't report into SPINS. Right next door is Jimbo's, who does. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
a brand and I'm trying to develop a selling story that's going to get on the radar of these category merchants for all these different companies who are making buying decisions, I might allocate more resources towards Jimbo's because I can track and measure my success there and share that story easier than if I were to invest the same amount of money into Barron's.
Right.
So there's a different type of value for retailers who choose to opt into these systems.
Okay. Next question. Can a brand go to a chain like Jimbo's and say, "Can you just give us our data for Jimbo's?" Or does Jimbo say you have to buy it from Spin since we have an agreement with Spins?
No, there are a handful of chains that will provide data to brands, in particular smaller brands, to help them get started, which is really, really cool. And that's a huge value add for small startup brands. I'm trying to think of a couple. Air One actually has a platform that they started. I think you have to buy into it. That's one. Gosh, there's a handful of other providers out there, but there's another way to get access to this data, and we're going really off topic now, but there's like distributor depletion data, which is not exactly the same as syndicated sell-through data, but it's
Yeah.
directionally close and it's helpful. But that's not information that like the category buyers are going to be able to see or have their hands on.
Yeah. So to me, 101 takeaways for people just to understand the problem in the macro. Nothing to do with the product being regenerative, just basically like brands selling into these retailers that we focus on. There's three things people should know. One, the data is managed by third parties, right? And it is aggregated, sold into, put behind the power of whatever these third parties like Nielsen, Spins, etc. That's takeaway
Circana,
one.
yeah,
Circana. So it's managed by these third parties, not by the actual retailers. Two is it's disjointed, right? So Sprouts data is with Spins, Whole Foods data is with no one, right? As far as I know, like that's a separate thing you have to do to access Whole Foods data.
Whole Foods, you can get access to Whole Foods competitive level data through Nielsen, and they have their own internal data platform. That's another. It's the prime example. I can't believe I didn't think of it before. Every brand who sells into Whole Foods has
Mhm.
access to their data platform for free, which is incredible and a huge resource and value. So kudos to Whole Foods for doing that.
But the takeaway there is still anyone with decent distribution in the US has to access multiple systems to
Correct.
basically understand the entirety of their business, non-chain or non-store specific. So
Yes.
so it's disjointed, right? So third party, disjointed, those are the first two takeaways. And the last one is it's all paywall, which we really haven't talked about. Like that's a rare example, like a Whole Foods, where if you're on the shelf, you get access to the data, which even that you could consider paywalled because it costs money to be carried in Whole Foods and to do promos at Whole Foods and all the things it takes to service that retailer. But whether it's Nielsen, Spin, Circana, any of these data providers, none of it's free pretty much. Or if it's free, it's something that's freemium that ultimately you really can't get the true value of until you're a paying customer. That's a pretty significant cost. Um,
Correct.
break that paywall piece down for us, maybe with some specificity and some examples if you can.
First, before we get into the paywall piece, there's one other really important thing to differentiate. When we talk about like the specific retailers like Whole Foods, for example, I
Mm-hmm.
as a brand can log into the Whole Foods portal and get my specific brand performance data. So I can see how my brands and my SKUs are performing at Whole Foods stores. I
Right,
do not have access to any category level or competitive level data, which is
right.
the information brands need to present to buyers to get on shelf. So there's a huge difference there. And what you're talking about in particular is like, the paywall to get access to that competitive level data to see, how does my brand, let's say I've got a functional beverage, how does my functional beverage compete against the other existing functional beverages within a given geography?
Right.
That's where things start to cost a lot of money. Um,
It's the equivalent to running the 100 meters in a track meet and you can see your score, but if there's 9 other people in your heat, you can't see their score. So it's like you might have an idea of your goal or if it's good versus your internal goals that you ran a sub 10 100 meters, but if there's 9 other people and you can't see their score, you don't have the competitive set to know actually how you're doing in the competitive race, so to speak.
I think that's a really good analogy. Um, so yeah, and to get access to that data, Man, I haven't asked this question of Spins, and I'm going to focus on Spins for a lot of this because they have more contracts with the naturally leaning retailers than a Nielsen or a Circana. So with Spins, they've got like a entry level, like I think it's like an emerging brands package, right? And I think the baseline package there is in the smallest thing, and it all depends on the category, the size of the category. And when I say the size, I'm talking about the amount of revenue the category brings in, how many retailers end up in the packages. It's relatively complex to figure all that out. But at the minimum, I think you're looking at between ten and $15,000 a year to get, I mean, scratching the surface of the data you need to succeed as a brand.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say disclaimer, because we're gonna have to go here to talk about the specific data providers. One, we are presenting anecdotal information based on the best knowledge we have at the time that could no longer be up to date, but we believe is up to date. So one, don't sue us, please, and you shouldn't. Two, Spins and Nielsen IQ specifically, we are in conversations with people on those teams trying to work on creating solutions for these. So I want to just state, at least those two organizations to some degree are working in good faith with us to try and support regenerative brands and regenerative products. So we by no means want to say this is totally their fault. They're totally incompetent. They're totally not helping with these issues. We want to work to do more and faster with them on these issues, but we are not trying to paint them as the bad guys or gals and say that they're evil or doing something wrong. Like, we are trying to just expose this fundamental problem for the work that we see that needs to happen and use this as a forum to kind of brainstorm potential solutions by understanding the problem better. So just want to say that as a disclaimer, basically.
I think that's a fantastic disclaimer, and the right time, especially as I'm like spitballing numbers based on my memory from 6 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely take it all with a grain of salt. But yeah, and I think we're still focusing on just the regular brand and not even regenerative at this point in time. And I think
Right.
we'll start to make that pivot soon. But I think Kettle and Fire actually is a really good like case study for the types of problems we're talking about right now. Because when Kettle and Fire first hit shelves, like we were the first shelf stable bone broth. And when we had to buy data, we had to buy category data for the entire, it's called like SSRTE, like soup, which includes broth and all this other stuff. And you have to buy that package. And at the time, there was no subcategory for bone broth. So we had to manually, by UPC, pull that out to look at, because, as an emerging bone broth company, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we didn't want to be competing against Swanson. Our performance is going to look like next to nothing. And we're very different attributes, different value claims, different ARPs. We were almost
Right.
$10 a box at the time. They were $2 for 32 ounces. So that's not the selling story. That's not our competition. It's a different target market. It's not
Yeah.
going to help us. Now, bone broth has become such a monolith that has a category definition within Spins, and there is an official subcategory. So now we have like a filtering system where we can just click on bone broth and see how Kettle and Fire bone broth is performing against other bone broths in the category. I should also say this time that Kettle and Fire is considered. We now consider ourselves a broth company, not a bone broth company. This is Kettle and Fire plug for a moment, and we have become the number one broth brand in the natural channel, which is a
Hell yeah.
monumental success. And to be able to track that, we've been tracking that stat for the last 6.5 years. And we just started to achieve it recently. And to go up against like the incumbents of this category is huge to see it. This is just, I'm trying to showcase like how we use data internally and really just giving us a little bit of a shout out because it's a pretty big moment for us as a brand.
Yeah. No, super cool. And I actually think you added a fourth like major takeaway that we should highlight by sharing that, which is it's managed by third parties, one, it's disjointed, two, it's behind a paywall, three, and fourth, really, that we probably maybe don't even talk about enough is that the data has to be managed or translated into value. So it's not just getting the data, it's like the brand or a third-party partner of theirs or a consultant or somebody has to be able to actually help them take the data and do something and create some sort of value with it. Like, it's not just getting the data is going to solve any problem or create any opportunity for the brand. So I think that's an even important fourth layer to add.
That's a super fair point because unless you can take, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of rows of
Mhm.
information across, I don't even know how many columns of data. Um, you got to be able to turn all of that raw information into usable information from either how is this going to benefit me and my company, action items perspective, or what stories can I pull out of this information to make an interesting selling story and try to capture more doors or get more SKUs on shelf or whatever else the goal might be. Um, so yeah, really good point. And there are a handful of experts in the space who can assist with that. We don't have to get into those specifics today, but
Yeah.
there are definitely some options out there.
Yeah. So that feels like a good baseline understanding. I think I like those 4 takeaways for people that maybe don't know a lot and need something to kind of use to build on the rest of the conversation. Um, Seems like we should get into more of the product attribute side, which is really the regen component. Um, I guess I'll state my basic understanding and have you add slash edit it with your greater expertise, which is
Mhm.
basically, hey, we've established SKU specific data from the individual UPC of an individual product is being captured in this data, and a data provider has the opportunity to track various attributes of that SKU, like organic, non-GMO, keto, kosher, gluten-free. You could throw 1,000 of them out there. Some are tracked, some are not. Some are governed by third party, some are not. Some are wrapped up into other attributes that the data providers have created on their own. Some of them are wrapped up into even bigger third parties that the retailer wants. What would you add or edit from that articulation of kind of the individual product attribute tracking?
I think I think you hit that pretty well on the head. Hit that nail well on the head. I botched that phrase. But I think
I
this
think you said it right.
okay.
Hit the nail on the head. You're good.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I'm rusty, man. It's been 2 weeks. Um, I think it might be the right time to flip. I'm gonna turn my hat backwards and think about this not from the
There we
brand
go.
perspective anymore, but
There we
think about
go.
it from the retailer perspective because this is going to be like I think this will help to highlight why this is so important.
Mhm.
And let's talk about a trend that isn't regen. Let's talk about keto, which, in my opinion, had its rise and is now fallen.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm a category buyer 5 years ago, and maybe not a category buyer, if I'm a director of grocery and I've got a handful of different buyers underneath me, and I'm trying to identify, okay, what trends are moving in the right direction, and maybe keto is crushing in salty snacks because chicharrones have launched and man, people are buying a ton of chicharrones and
Mhm.
I'm tracking the keto claim within that category and thinking, holy cow, like look at what's happening to keto and salty snacks. How do I get more of that shopper into other categories? How do I get the keto component into other places so I can tell my category buyers, I need you to find something keto in dairy or keto in baking or
Mhm.
keto in, whatever other category you want to come up with. Um, and that's part of why these claims and having the ability to track claims is so important because you can attribute momentum to a claim rather than a brand or an item, and that can lead to once it's identified as an opportunity to make more money, the retailers will flag it and say, "Hey, we want to get more of this in our doors."
Mhm.
And I think it's really clear and easy to see how that could impact regen. If
Mhm.
there are a handful of regenerative leaders in certain categories, and let's go immediately to Alexander Family Farms and what they're doing in dairy. They are crushing in dairy, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. Regen being one of them, but A2 specifically, their branding, their messaging, very authentic, very transparent, farmer owned. They've got a ton of different attributes. But if I'm a grocery manager and I'm seeing or a dairy manager, Alexander crushing in milk, I might be like, okay, like, do we have any regen in yogurt yet? Like, maybe we need to
Mhm.
prioritize that. Although Alexander now has yogurt, I'm just trying to come up with a good example. But I'll pause there and see if you have any questions about like flipping the hat or the attribute side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's the right segue into basically exposing the current flaw of regen attribution,
Hmm.
or designating regen attribution product specific. And people that listen to the show or follow the space, it's an easy answer. What's the problem? The problem is there's 47 different organizations that can back up a regenerative claim, and there's 100 different articulations on packaging right now of regenerative claims. I've just made those numbers up, but basically it's, you know, you can have 7 to 10 different certifications on the front of pack. You can have that certification on the back of pack. You can not be certified and have a romance copy claim on the front of pack, side panel, back of pack. So it's not like these other binary claims that are one or the other and governed by one specific third party where, there's a simple validation that the product and or that third party can present to the data provider and the retailer of we are binary non-GMO or not, we are binary USDA organic or not. So just like with the data, just like with the retail data itself, ReGen claims are disjointed. They are not unified, and there is not a single attribution rule that all the data providers are using to aggregate and unify all the various regenerative claims on products today.
That's a really good point. And I think at this moment, it could be interesting to talk about how those attributes end up being flagged and attached to those specific UPCs to begin
For sure.
with. So when
Yeah.
I submit a new item into SPINS to say, hey, we're going to be launching a new SKU, we want to be sure that we track the data, we want it to pop up on everybody's radar. We submit that item, we have to include label flat images that show the NFP, nutritional facts panel, the list of
Mhm.
ingredients, all the claims that are made, all that information. Then we have to tick the boxes for what attributes we want to be associated with that UPC. And I believe there's somebody internally at SPINS who has to validate that that is true.
Yeah.
Example, if I am a granola company, let's not use granola. If I'm an oat company and I try to make a keto claim, that's probably not going to fly because it's going to be super high carb and not keto. So there is some level of like fact checking happening.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
keto is an interesting one because there's not really, there could be like a keto certification, but for the most
Mhm.
part, you don't really need to pay for that cert. It's just, are your macros ketogenic or not? Um, but you do have to like physically tick these boxes. And to AC's point, when you go to submit into SPINS, there isn't a way to tick regenerative unless I haven't done this recently, but they
Mhm.
could have regenerative organic certified in their system
They
now.
they do. They have rock, and to my understanding, that is it. So unless you're rock, there'd be no other way to tag your product for having a regenerative claim for spin specifically.
Correct, and that is my understanding also. And we should
Yeah.
we should say it's fantastic that they have rock. It's great
Yeah.
that rock has some level of recognition, and it also presents challenges for the regenerative brands who are doing legitimate work that are already market validated,
Mhm.
that are not rock. And there's no way, to AC's point earlier, we can't track the success of those brands, which then leads category buyers to not see this trend as strong as it could be. And then it's harder to prioritize who to bring in, who not to bring in, and why. So uh, it's complicated, as all things, as we learn in food, it's really complicated.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that covers the submission piece.
Yeah. And I would say to maybe add on to, you covered the retail decision-making perspective. On the brand competitive analysis perspective, because you would have a region attribute that isn't coded in, you might have no idea when you look at the competitive data what effect that's having in your success in the category, right? So you might attribute more success to something that is documented versus the competitive set because it's there versus regen not being there. You might mistakenly inflate the power of having a regenerative claim on pack because there is no data there to say, XYZ, but you do know that you maybe have the only regen claim in the category. But ultimately, the issue is it's a black box, which is a problem on the individual SKU level. It's a problem on the category management buyer level, and it's a problem on the, what would I call what we do, support service level, because we can't
Sure.
report or track results in aggregate, basically, and holistically. Um, so
Yeah, I think just to try to put that into an example, if we're trying to track like how much distribution are regenerative SKUs capturing, how much are they gaining? Like there's no way to track that information in the syndicated data. It's literally impossible unless you consider the only regenerative items to be regenerative organic certified, which, as we mentioned before on the show, Whole Foods, the leading natural channel retailer in the United States, potentially the world, currently allows for front to pack claims with 4 different certifications on pack, and that's regenerative organic certified, land to market EOV, regenified, and a greener world. So we already have a gap in what the market has said is considered to be regenerative and what the syndicated platforms are claiming to be regenerative. Um, So I think we're doing a really good job articulating the complexity of this problem thus
Yeah.
far without any solutions.
Yes, but we did put a disclaimer on the front end that we don't know if we have the exact solution to offer. We're doing the what's the quote? If I wanted to chop down a tree, I'd spend 90% of the time sharpening the axe. We're spending 90%
Right.
of the time understanding the problem better. So to me, for the regen specific part of this, takeaway one is it's disjointed because of the certification landscape / claims governance landscape, whatever terminology you want to throw to that. And it's disjointed because the individual third parties that are capturing the data have their own governance and claim methodology for assigning attributions to regen SKUs. SPINS approaches it differently than Nielsen, who approaches it differently than maybe just Whole Foods does in their individual platform, whatever. So there's like 2 layers of being disjointed actually for regen. And then the second part, which you were getting to, which we were kind of getting to there, is like basically because of that and other reasons, there's no way to really look at data right now and actually come up with causation. I mean, there's actually very little ways to look at it and come up with correlation, but causation is ultimately the goal we're after, or something that would lead us to be able to at least extrapolate that with certain confidence. And what I mean by that is causation is the product is regenerative and we believe it's having XYZ effect because of it being regenerative, because we added the cert, because we changed the formulation and now it is regenerative versus when it wasn't. There's really no way to do that today. Like the closest thing that we have to that, and I don't mean to pick on them, but it is the only data that we have, is like because Rock is coded into SPINS, they are reporting on their distribution growth and their revenue growth of Rock brands in SPINS. However, that's simply correlation. And like you already said with Alexander, maybe Alexander's selling really well for all these other attribute reasons that have nothing to do with regenerative. But because it is ticked as regenerative, or Rock in this case specifically, whoever those Rock brands are coded into SPINS, they can basically claim Rock brands are growing XYZ amount or growing XYZ doors or growing XYZ revenue, which yes, that's true, but we don't know that it's because they are Rock or because it's regenerative overall. And ultimately, all these fundamental kind of issues, top of funnel, are leading to the bottom of funnel issue where we can't report on regen products in aggregate and we can't with any reliable confidence say, having a regenerative claim is causing this result from a sales perspective.
I think you said that really well. The only thing I would add, and it's not even like an ad, it's just a different way of thinking about a similar issue you're mentioning. Like with
Yeah.
Alexander, for example, we're like,
Yeah.
hey, okay, Alexander's crushing right now.
Yeah.
Kudos to Blake and Stephanie and the team crushing it out there.
Yeah.
Are they selling because it's regenerative or not? And if we had, theoretically, more regenerative certifications recognized by syndicated platforms, and we could track other regenerative brands in other categories who are all going to have different claims because, me as a bone broth brand, I'm not going to sell well because I'm A2 dairy because we don't have dairy in our product. So if you can capture all of the regenerative brands across different categories, and it kind of strips out the other attributes because then you have a common denominator and you can really see like, hey, this trend is really growing. And you can kind of do that right now with just Rock brands, but is Rock selling because it's regenerative or it's organic or both? And this is, again, part of why like it's so important to have all of the regenerative brands coded in this thing. But at some point in time, you're going to have to draw a line and say, okay, which certifications / verifications do we allow to make these claims and which don't? All the syndicated platforms are going to have to make the same difficult decision that all of the retailers are going to have to make too. And what really like the word that keeps popping up in my brain here is lack of unification as a movement.
Yeah.
Is a big part of the potential solution here.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
No, I think you said that really well. And like, we are solutions oriented folks, and we've tried to share problems or our understanding of problems in this platform in a way that actually creates social accountability for us to help, for us to commit to being part of the solution. And I would just say, what are we doing right now? We're trying to work with really SPINS and Nielsen most specifically to understand the problem from their perspective and figure out what recommendation could we make to those two data organizations individually, but that also maybe could be adopted across data reporting and syndication at large to bring that unification and then harmony to these regenerative claims. We are not close to accomplishing that, but in general, like that is the goal and the North Star of the conversations that are at very preliminary stages, but are taking place in some fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. And AC's led the majority of that work, and we appreciate all the efforts. It's not been easy. Uh, but hopefully, we're doing a good job of explaining why that's so important and the type of potential impact that could have for the legitimate regenerative brands in the space.
Yeah. And I'll just, this is not a feel bad for AC moment, but I think it's important to mention because people need to understand like the commercial dynamics of trying to make stuff like this happen. It's very challenging for us to go get some of that done because ultimately, and no offense to them, they're businesses that need to act in their own self-interest. Nielsen and SPINS, there's not an immediate way to commercialize these changes that they could make to better track regenerative overall, right? Unless we brought the various certifiers to the table or unless it created some new insight that would make more brands be paying customers, which, yeah, that would be the ultimate goal. We want whatever we recommend to be very symbiotic and add value to their business. But it's not as simple and easy as, hey, I'm a new brand, new SKU that's created a category and created a new attribute, and I need you to track that so that I'll give you $50,000 a year to pay for your data. And that ultimately is sometimes the most challenging part of the work that we're doing in this harmony unifying space is like there's infrastructure that needs to be built for the collective good that I can't necessarily articulate has $100,000 for this person, this person, this person in value in the next 12 months. Does that make sense? I don't want to like seem like
It
that's me
does.
bitching. I'm just trying to I'm trying to break down the fundamentals of the business aspects here.
Totally. No, I think you did it well. And if I could summarize it, it's like doing this very difficult, complicated, nuanced work doesn't provide any additional revenue income for these businesses. Therefore, it is not really a high priority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
And
it's like, in some of the conversations I've had with these folks, it's like you try to pitch them on if we can do this, it has the power to potentially change how we interact with the planet. Right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
just sell them on the vision and the future and that they can be a part of it and that they, um, if they are willing to change or put in the work or the effort, they can be a part of, making the world a better place. And that only goes so far in business, but it's worth
Yeah.
a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we are not saying that it doesn't have any long-term value or ROI because I definitely think it does. I'm very convicted that it does, or I don't think we would be trying because there really is no sell there if it doesn't. So I definitely don't want
Right.
that to be the message. I think the message is just like you said, it's just very hard to articulate the short-term value of it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, like everyone has to really prioritize that in the world that we live in, and that's like totally fair. And we're all stuck in that same um, demand on our time and our ROI. So we empathize.
So in AC's doc, the road ahead, we talk about wanting to cover two very specific things. One that's like the importance of codifying specific regenerative claims. I think that we've done that pretty well thus far. And
Yeah.
two, the importance of a single universal regen attribute into the data. And I don't think we've talked about that enough. So like we said, ROC already exists and is codified in here. But like, let's say, for example, just to throw a hypothetical or a theoretical out there, if SPINS, Circana, Nielsen, everybody else adopted Whole Foods policy of the same four verifications we talked about before, they could have an attribute added to their data. So, like when you're submitting an item in SPINS, if you have one of those four boxes, you can tick the box, and then in the syndicated data, it will populate as, hey, this brand is ReGen or whatever they want to call it, regenerative or regenerative brands, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would then trickle down and be able to impact all of the things we've already discussed. The ability to track the claim for the brand, to see who else is competitive in the set that has a regenerative box ticked. Merchants can identify trends and decide, which categories are or are not participating meaningfully in the regenerative movement, and all sorts of other things. So
Yeah.
that is super easy to talk about, very difficult to solve for,
Yeah.
and there's another level of complexity that like they might need to have like the one like major regen box and 4 sub boxes, one for each verification, because they might also want to track which certifications are doing better than others and more impactful and things like that. So again, complicated, nuanced, but that's one version of the future that could potentially work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure from our conversations to date which is the right order of operations. If the data provider would want to track the type of claim first, like do we need to get just for the sake of simplicity, we'll just use those 4 that Whole Foods has approved, right? Rock, Land of Market, Regenified, and A Greener World. So when you go in to submit your new SKU, you would do that first, and then it would automatically, as a rule, tag you as a regenerative product. But the thing it's really coding in is that you are a Rock product or a Regenified product or a Land of Market product. Or do you tag yourself as a regenerative product and then, like you said, have the sub underneath of what basically the third-party validation or the way you got there? I think that's a question, right? Because if we take SPINS as precedent, they would probably have to do it the first way that I articulated, which is by the certifier first, because they've basically gone that direction by just doing Rock first. Maybe with Nielsen it's the same, maybe with Nielsen it's different, et cetera, et cetera. Then that introduces, so that's complex, one, but I think we can solve for that. Like I really do think there's an answer. The other thing we would need to think about, and where most of the contention will probably come from, is the validation of those claims, right? For instance, let's say I have a coffee SKU and my whole coffee bean has a Romance copy regenerative claim that is not approved by any third party, including the Whole Foods regenerative assessment. But I can go in and I can tell SPINS, hey, I have it on my packaging. I'm being sold in these retailers and no one's told me I can't sell it and no one's sued me and I have it on my packaging. And hey, this is a regenerative product through a Romance copy claim. And then I'm Heirloom Coffee Roasters and I have a Rock whole bean coffee SKU in that same retailer in that same set of SPINS data that is Rock, that is third party validated. And I can send SPINS, when I upload the SKU, some sort of PDF document that says, hey, this SKU is certified Rock. What I'm getting at there is you then have the whole nother challenge of the governance of those attributes and those claims and the validation of them, which once again, I think there's a solution for, but because there's all these different articulations of the claim on pack, and there's all these different ways to validate, it's very multi-pronged. It's just this giant, what are those things called? Like those charts with all the legs on them?
Flow chart?
Yeah, flow chart, org chart, whatever. I mean, it's not an org chart, but that's the image in my head of like the algorithmic thinking that would need to occur to code it all in, basically.
Yeah. And I see there's like pros and cons to both potential systems, right? Like, let's say SPINS doesn't allow, if you don't have one of the certs, like you don't get to be regenerative in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Like that could be great for governance, but for the small startup brand who can't afford certification or is on a waiting list or whatever, like you don't get that validation.
Yeah.
And this is contentious. These are contentious waters, right? Because then now we get into, okay, well then how does that prevent greenwashing? In my mind, we really do need to get to the place where to make claims, you've got to have certification. We need to get there in time, and we need to do it in a way that honors all of the great work the different legitimate organizations are doing.
Yeah.
And we need to try to figure out how to unify that in some way so that we can do these collaborative type initiatives that are going to raise the tide for all of the regenerative ships.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Nothing to add on that.
Easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah. And we'll keep chipping away at it, with a great deal of urgency and consideration for various positive and negative outcomes. But the status quo of the data that we are getting and we are providing to the marketplace is not going to help anyone, at least in unison, in aggregate. And that's really the message I think we're trying to drive home. The second bullet of our solution is kind of redundant and basically baked into, if we figured out a way to how to tag all those attributes, get the companies to report on them. So I don't know how much that one needs to be explained besides there's like a duh part of that, which is, hey, if I'm a brand and I have products with that attribute, I want it to be able to be seen in all the various reporting that I would have access to. I do think there's maybe an additional thing that I don't know how this would be paid for or tracked, or various comps for other trade organizations or claims like it, but we would want to report on things in aggregate, right? So that just like the OTA does every year, we can say the regenerative market is growing by 70% and it's up to $6.5 billion and it's fastest growing in these 4 categories of the store. Da, 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 da. Like we cannot fundamentally do that today. And we need to, but it all starts at that individual product attribution spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important to highlight. It starts with the individual UPC, as all
Yeah.
things retail data do. If it doesn't work there, it's not going to work anywhere.
Yeah. What else you got, partner? I think that kind of covers it.
I think it kind of covers it, but I want to bring it back to 2 examples we talked about before to provide more clarity on the type of power, if we can make this future a reality, can have. So let's go back
Please.
to keto and let's go back to bone broth.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to make this about kettle and fire at all, but when bone broth,
It's the
go ahead,
best
go ahead.
data you have and the easiest example to give that's going to be really clear. And I appreciate you being willing to share it. So don't feel like you're making it about kettle and fire.
Okay, cool. So when bone broth gets like cred as a subcategory, that changes the prioritization level for some of the less early adopter type accounts in the country who pull data. Because if they realize once bone broth becomes its official subcategory within the data platforms they are working with, and they look at their assortment and they're like, oh, actually, we don't have any bone broth, or maybe I only have 1 or 2, and
Yeah.
they can see that competitively other retailers, their bone broth growth is outpacing their quote cooking broth or total broth growth, or most of that total broth growth is coming from the subcategory of bone broth. They then realize like, hey, we need to change our assortment and get these products back on shelf. Sorry, not back on shelf for the first time. There's a consumer need. It's proven at our competitive accounts. We have a strong level of confidence that it's going to sell. It provides incremental revenue to our set because it likely won't cannibalize. It's got a higher ARP, average retail price point. It's proven to move units in dollars. And this is the type of stuff that the people who make these decisions look at, and it's how they make their decisions. So yeah, just translate that bone broth to regenerative, and to me, it becomes really clear and easy to see like the type of impact this can have. And at the end of the day, like, what are we actually talking about? Like, trickle down effect. If more retailers carry more regenerative products and more consumers buy more regenerative products because retailers are carrying regenerative products, we increase demand for regenerative products. Then farmers grow more regenerative products and change from conventional industrial agriculture to these positive benefits. And we end up in a world where more nutrient dense food and better climate safe practices, more drought tolerance, blah, 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 blah. So we got really into the nitty gritty and like some really sales specific stuff,
Yeah.
but I wanted to bring it back to like full circle. Like, why does this matter? And that's how I think about it.
Yeah. And I will even flip that to the worst possible outcome that would still be air quote beneficial, of like, if we have the data and we see that we're never going to get consumers to care beyond a certain point, there's no positive effect of being regenerative on your sales. There's, the way most of the brands are putting it on packaging isn't resonating with consumers. We can then be informed to like change our course, right? Like, so it's not only having the data to then flywheel the positive, it's let's have the constructive criticism in the data of maybe there's things we shouldn't do anymore. Maybe there's things we aren't doing that we need to do. Maybe there's like, whatever that is, we don't know. It's, once again, it's a black box. So yeah, knowledge is power. And there's some real complex barriers to us, I think, getting this knowledge in aggregate for all these products and brands, and also the individual brands and their individual products, but not impossible. And yeah, I feel like we tackled a very complex topic somewhat well today. What do you think?
I hope so. I mean, I can talk about this and feel like I'm being eloquent, but I have no idea if anybody listening to this is gonna be like just glazed over, turning this off halfway through, or they're actually gonna get some information out of it, and hopefully the latter.
We know we're going to get some plays though, because we're going to have a strong clickbaity headline title. So at least we know
That's probably
that.
true. Yes. Yeah. Also, and we can choose to edit this out or not, but I feel like it's worth a plug. And I hate plugging my own stuff, but I run a small
Yeah.
data company called Slingshot CPG,
Yeah.
and we analyze Whole Foods data specifically for small startup brands who don't know how to download massive amounts of data and turn it into usable information. Super low cost. There's a web platform. So if anybody's selling at Whole Foods, doesn't know how to use their data well, go to slingshotcpg.com. I don't even know if that's my website. I need to check. This is how much I focus on this. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Slingshotcpg.com. There's an inquiry there. Reach out or hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to help.
Yeah. I'm really happy you brought that up because I actually thought about that when making the outline and forgot to put it there. And we should plug it because we've already acknowledged, like, one, brands need help turning this data into value, and two, it's very expensive. And I know what you're working on with Slingshot tries to solve for both of those things, at least on the whole food side. So brands that are interested, definitely check that out. And anyone who's interested in this topic and potentially has ideas, has feedback or criticism on maybe a way we're not thinking about it correctly, or ways that we can work with the most important and influential stakeholders and organizations to create this knowledge out in the world, definitely open to talking and collaborating with folks, and working towards, getting more holistic, aggregated, regenerative product retail sales data out into the world. That's a mouthful.
That was like line. But I agree with it, and you hit the nail on the head.
There you go. And everyone else, flood Kyle with emails, texts, and LinkedIn DMs about how we need him to come back to as many episodes as possible, and thank him for returning after an extremely brief initial hiatus. So thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
For sure, man. Great to be a guest. Happy to jump on, and we both know I'll be back from time to time. You're not flying solo.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you, dude.
For sure, man.
For transcripts, show notes, and more information on this episode, check out our website, ReGen-Brands.com. That is ReGen-Brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, ReGen Brands, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, the ReGen Brands Weekly, and follow our ReGen Brands LinkedIn page to stay in the know on all the latest news, insights, and perspectives from the world of regenerative CPG. Thanks so much for tuning into the ReGen Brands podcast. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, your talent, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.